Background for our good dead friend Socrates and our good dead friend Plato. Socrates' background: born 470 BC, died in 399 BC, and is of course still dead today. According to history, he was the son of a sculptor and a midwife. Like many philosophers, he was eccentric in appearance and manner. His clothes were rumpled, and apparently he walked like a pelican, and was reputedly quite ugly, yet robust. He served in both the military and the government. Now, one of the things that Socrates is perhaps best known for is his view of wisdom, namely that he claims that wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. There's also the question of why Socrates ends up being put on trial, spoilers, and dies. Also spoilers. So here's how it went down. A friend of his went to the oracle at Delphi, and Delphi is still there today, and if you wanted to, you could travel there and see the ruins of the temple there, where the oracles would speak their prophecies and answer questions. So his friend goes there and says, "Oracle, who is the wisest of men?" And the oracle says, "Socrates. Socrates is the wisest." And so his friend goes back and says, "Soc, guess what?" Soc says, "What?" And his friend says, "Guess who's the wisest of men?" Socrates says, "I don't know." And his friend says, "You, Socrates, you're the wisest." And so Socrates decides that the gods must be wrong, so he sets out to try to disprove them, which of course shows his view of the gods. And the way to do this, just as one would try to show that one was not the fastest by finding someone faster at running, he tries to find someone wiser. So he questions the politicians and finds them to be, not surprisingly, not very wise. He questions the poets, finds them lacking in wisdom. He questions the craftspeople and finds that although they know many fine skills, they believe they know far more than they do, that they're wiser than they are. And so he finds them all to be disappointments. And because of this questioning and annoying people in public, he was brought up on trial. And what he concludes is, of course, that wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. Now, there are some questions about who is the real Socrates, namely because Socrates himself, supposedly, believed that philosophy was a matter of talking, typically while drinking, and not something to write down. So we don't have, as far as we know, any writings actually done by Socrates. Now, Plato claimed that his early dialogues, the ones he wrote early on, and things can get kind of confusing because there were dialogues that were written early on in Plato's life, and then there were dialogues based on where they were set. So, for example, Plato's Apology and Crito take place at the end of Socrates' life, but they were written fairly early. And other dialogues he wrote much later in his life were set obviously before Socrates' death. So it gets kind of confusing. There are the ones that were early because they were written earlier by Plato, and then there's the actual sort of timeline of Socrates. And the dialogues, when they're written, don't always match up to those. Now, many scholars claim that these early dialogues, ones written early by Plato, early in his life, are accurate transcriptions, and that later on Plato, for whatever reason, maybe just forgetting what Socrates said or remembering things Socrates never actually said, that he starts having Socrates serve more as a mouthpiece for his own views as opposed to saying what Socrates really said. And so we don't know for sure what Socrates himself actually believed or thought because, again, we don't have the writings, and the dialogues, they present very different views. So what is part of the origin story of Socrates? Well, a big part of it is his conflict with the sophists. According to Socrates himself, he studied under the sophist Prodicus, but he jokingly said he could afford only the cheap and complete course, so he never really finished his education. He was rather critical of the sophists because what the sophists claimed was that you couldn't know stuff, that morality was relative, and that what you should do is seek success. And he was critical of them because they were not seeking knowledge, because they thought you really couldn't get that. And he also thought they were mistaken in teaching people that the goal is success, and in their definition of success. Because he believed that these sophists were presenting people with mere images and illusions, and also believed them to be a threat to the morality of society. Now, to be fair to the sophists, we have Socrates' criticism, so naturally he's going to present them in a negative light. So, for Socrates, what is the worst thing? Well, for him, the greatest danger is ignorance. Namely, not knowing things, that's bad, but not knowing that you don't know is the greatest trouble of all, because if you know you don't know, then you're less likely to do something stupid. A person who doesn't know what they don't know, they'll tend to think they know and then do some stupid stuff. And so Socrates saw his mission objective as curing people of ignorance, for which he was sentenced to death. So some kind of lesson there. Now on to our good dead friend Plato. Socrates was Plato's mentor, and he considered Socrates to be the best of people, the wisest and most just. And this had a profound influence upon him, this death of Socrates. And he wondered why the society of Athens could not tolerate Socrates, and what kind of society would be needed that would not kill good people, which is still a question we're looking at today. At least people who don't want good people to be killed. For people who want good people to be killed, I guess things are working pretty well. Now, Plato himself was born around 428 to 427 BC, and he was born into an aristocratic family, so pretty well off. He was trained to be a political leader. He was also apparently a wrestler, and Plato, according to some, was his wrestling name. So it'd be kind of like if The Rock became a philosopher. In centuries from now, people are reading the dialogues of The Rock. He traveled quite a bit around the world, perhaps to Egypt. Socrates, of course, famously would often swear by the dog, which is, of course, Anubis, one of the Egyptian gods of the dead in the underworld. And we are pretty sure he went to Syracuse, Italy, around 388. So, what's Socrates' student Plato really famous for? Well, one main thing is the founding of the academy, which, of course, from which we get our terms academics and academy today. And you may have wondered, why is it called the academy? Well, here's the explanation. Apparently, he had his school located in a grove sacred to the hero Academus. So, if this hero had been like Bill or Conan, I guess it would be doing Conanademics or something like that. So, that's how it worked out. Just so happened that the hero was there. So, now we use the term academy, which I suppose indirectly honors the hero Academus. Now, he tried to actually apply his philosophical teachings. In 368 and 361, he tried to teach the ruler of Syracuse, known as Dionysius the Younger. He failed and had to flee for his life in 361, which, if your students are trying to kill you, that's a pretty bad review. He ended up dying around 348, 347 BC, and is, of course, still very dead today. Now, he's also known, in addition to creating the academy, he's also known for books, lots of books. His main concern was with ethical theory, but he had the belief that in order to get to ethics, which is where people often want to start with good and evil and all that stuff, he believed he had to work out all of the other stuff, like metaphysics, epistemology, etc. And so all that stuff was aimed at this ultimate project, a comprehensive philosophy. Now, because of the death of Socrates, who he regarded as a very ethical person, he saw political philosophy as being very important. And he believed, as I alluded to earlier, that you need to work out metaphysics to solve ethical and political problems, which may seem sort of odd today that the solutions we find in metaphysics gets often seen as the least practical and strangest of philosophy, but that's what he believed. But just because he's famous and dead doesn't mean that he's right. And so he builds this massive amount of works, of which we don't have all of them, namely the dialogues of Plato. So kind of his main deals were building the academy, creating, in a way, the foundation of the university system that we have today, the far, far, far distant ancient foundation, and of course all his dialogues. And it's led some to claim that all of philosophy to this day is but a footnote to Plato. And of course he's dead. There's that. So that ends our brief look at the background for Socrates and Plato.